In the last video, we finally got to see our item info VCs in action. Everything looks great. We're missing the date label though. So in this video, we're going to tackle that date label. And the tricky thing here is that we have to convert it from what we get back on the server, this kind of funky format, into something that's more pleasant to the human reader eye, right? We're going to create this GitHub Sense, label that we're going to do here. So we're going to create a date extension and do all that logic there and get this date label up and running. Let's get to it. So we're here in our user info VC, back up to the top, right? We have our header view, item view 1, item view 2. Now we're going to create our date label. So let date label equal, and this is going to be a GF body label. And we're going to initialize that with the text alignment of .center. We want that to be centered. So cool. Now remember we set up this item views array. We're going to plug that date label right in, and a lot of the heavy lifting is going to be done for us already. So down in our layout UI, remember we created these item views with the array. We're going to add our date label to that array. So date label. So now just by adding it to the array, we're automatically getting view.addSubView. We're translating the auto resizing mask into constraints. We're laying out the leading and trailing anchor with the same padding, which works because we want it to stretch across the whole screen with 20 padding left and right for our date label. Cool. So just by adding that to the array, bam, a lot of the heavy lifting done. All we have to do here is tell it where to be vertically in the view and then give it a height. So let's do that here. So we go date label dot top anchor dot constraint, and we're going to make this equal to the we're going to pin it to the bottom of item view 2. So item view 2 dot bottom anchor, and the constant is going to be padding. Again, we're using this 20 padding all around here. And date label dot height anchor dot constant, we're going to make it equal to 18. So that's it. Our UI for the date label is done. Now we need to set the text here. And where we're going to set the text is up here, the same place we added these child view controllers. We're going to do self.datelabel.text equals, and right now we're just going to, let's just test this real quick, equal date to be entered, right? Let's just see that we have our UI laid out nicely. So let's run this. SALEN 0400, get followers. I'll pick a random follower here and see, there it is, date to be entered at the bottom. So UI looking good. That was pretty quick because again, we've set up the infrastructure already. So now what we need to do is basically do user.createdAt, but let's actually do that. That text equals user.createdAt. Again, I want to show the steps all along the way. Let's run this so you can see how this is formatted and how this is not exactly what we're looking for. So get followers, another one. So there's our date. There we go. Let's just leave that in there. That'll make sense to people, right? What this is January 11th, 2013, and then you get the exact time. But remember, we just wanted to say GitHub Sense Jan 2013 is all we want this to say. So we need to take this date and format it basically. All right, so stop this. And to do that, we're going to create a date extension here. So in our extensions, do Command N. And actually we need to kind of do this in two parts. We're going to do it in two parts because these are very handy and common used extensions. So I want you to have the separate components of this whole function that we're going to do because those are going to come in handy, going to be very, very useful. In theory, you could combine it all into one function to do exactly what we need, but we're going to keep it separate for the reasons I just said. So Swift file, and we're going to call this date plus ext. This is how I format my extension files. And it's going to be an extension on date. And here we go. But before we do the date, like I said, this is in two parts. So user.createdAt is a string. Again, back to our model, createdAt here. It's a string that you saw there. So we need to do actually an extension on string as well. What we're going to do is we're going to convert the string to a date, and then we're going to convert that date into a formatted string. So we're kind of going from string to date, and then from date back to string. So like I said, it's a two-step process. But like I said, that converting this commonly used string from the server to a date is a super common extension. You're going to use this in a lot of apps. And then when you convert that date to the formatted string, that's what's more custom to our app because our format is unique, right? Jan 2013, right? We may need different formats. So anyway, Swift file, next, string plus ext. So the string extension. Same thing, extension, string, And here we're going to create a function called convert to date. So func convert to date, and that is going to return a date. I'm using functions. You could use a computed property and return. Right now, just to get Xcode to shut up here, we're going to return the date. And anytime you do date like that, it's just going to create a date that's right now. So it would be today's date, today's time. That's obviously not what we want, but it'll get Xcode to stop yelling at us for the time being. The first thing we need to create is a date formatter. So let date formatter equals date formatter. And then date formatter dot date format equals, and here's where we pass in a string. And dealing with dates are tricky if you've never dealt with them before. Let me pull up a website real quick that will really come in handy. And here it is, called nsdateformatter.com. And you can see the date formats you can use here. So you can see we're getting this format right here from the server. So you can see we want this string is how we want the date format to be. So we're going to copy this, Command C. And this is a very, very common format from the server, by the way. You're going to see this a lot. So that's why I kind of know this is the one it is. But you can see when we want Jan and then the year. So not January. So we want basically, see how this is like 4 capital M's and then the Y? We're going to just use 3 capital M's to get JAN, 3 letters of the month. So that's what we're going to use in the future. And you can see how the 3 capital M's here will give us this Jan. So whatever, format of the date you want, this is a great site to come to see kind of the format. So this is a good tool to use. So anyway, we're going to use this one, like I said here. So back to Xcode. So the date format is, we're going to paste that in there. And then here, let's do date formatter dot locale. And this is another string here. Let's line up the equal signs, equals. And then you can pass in a locale. Now this could be different depending on where you're at in the world. So locale with an identifier. And this is the US one. Again, back to Safari here with our date formatter site. You see here the locale. You can do a bunch of different ones based on your country. To be honest with you, I'm only familiar with the US one. If you are from somewhere else, you may have to do a little bit of research, but this NUS POSIX here is the locale we're going to use if you're in the US. So back to Xcode, and you got to type in N_US underscore POSIX. I think it's capital. Let me go back to that. Back to Safari. Yes, and capital US underscore capital POSIX. And then you can do date formatter dot time zone to make sure you're always getting the current time zone, right? Because time zones are always tricky. And then now that we have all that formatted, we can return date formatter dot date, and you can see from string, and it returns an optional. Let me go back to that so you can see. So dot date formatter from string. You see here it returns the optional. So the string we're going to pass in is self, because this is an extension on a string. So on a string, we're going to be able to call convert to date. The reason this returns an optional is because the string has to match this format exactly. Like this is pretty key here. So if I just did it on a string Sean, it's going to return nil because it can't convert a date from Sean. But if I get a string exactly in this format, which back to our user model, our created at string is in that format. Remember, we printed that out. So it will work on the date, but if it's not on that created at, it'll crash, right? So you could just do that, but we don't want to do that in case somebody calls convert to date on a string that's not compatible. So let's make this date optional that it returns right here. And there you go. So now this is optional. It can return nil. So now we're going to get a date object. And the reason I'm leaving this separate is because oftentimes you want to convert this to a date, because when you have dates, you can do a lot of date comparison stuff. Like if you want to find out, hey, what is 30 days from today? Swift can do that with their date objects. You can do a lot of cool stuff as long as your date is in a date object. So that's why we're leaving this separate, because this function right here, very, very, very handy. You'll probably use this in almost all your projects. So this is a big one. And now that we have our date object, now we can turn that date into a string that's formatted nicely. Remember, we talked about this being a two-step process. So in the date extension, func convert to month, year, format. Again, being very, very specific in what it does, and it returns a string. And again, we're going to need a date formatter. So let date formatter equal date formatter. And then date formatter dot date format, again, very similar to what we did. That date format equals, and this is the string. Now, if we go back to Safari, back to our NS date formatter, right? Remember, we're going to need to pass in a format that we want. So we don't want the full January 2020, right? So it's not 4 M's. And you can kind of like piece these together to build what you need. So I know I want 3 M's, 3 capital M's for the month to get the Jan, to get the shortened month. And then the full year is just 4 lowercase y's. So I need 3 big M's, 4 lowercase y's for my string to get the type of string we want. And again, this is a very, very good tool. You're going to use this a lot if you deal with dates. So back to Xcode, we want MMM, YYY, Y for our format. And then the same thing, we want to return date formatter dot string from date, and then the date we're going to pass in is self. Right, because we're doing this on the date object that we get. So now we get that Jan 2013 format that we're looking for. So again, this is what I talked about, the 2 kind of steps that I wanted to keep separate rather than combining it into one function. And I wanted to keep it separate again because these are common functions you're probably going to use, right? Like I said. So back to our string extension here. This is where we're going to combine them into our kind of our function that we need to use for this app specifically. So let's do func convert to display format, and that's going to return a string. So we're going to use the functions that we just created here. So we're doing this on a string. So the first thing we're going to do is convert that string to a date. And remember that date is an optional, so we're going to put it in a guard let. So guard let date equal self.convert to date, which is this function right up here. And basically if it's nil, so else, we want to return n/a. Whatever you want the date thing to say, if this does mess up, it could say not available. Maybe you can leave it blank. You can put NA, whatever you want to show up if this breaks, because we don't want the app to just crash, right? We just want the label to show something. So now that we have our date, we can return date dot convert to month year format. Again, this is the function here in the date extension. So that returns a string, remember, returns the string in this, month year format. So do a command B. So that returns a string. So again, what we did here is we're converting the string to a date. We're basically just combining the 2 extensions that we just did. Like I said, I could have did this all in one function, but that would have been very restrictive to this specific use case. And I wanted to give you pieces of code that you can use, in your other code bases. So now in our user info VC, instead of just doing user.createdAt, well, that is a string. So back to our string extension, we want to call user.createdAt.convert to display format, which will give us that month year format. So again, user.createdAt.convert to display format. And we should be good. Well, no, that'll just give us the format. We're not going to be completely done with that yet. So let's actually pull this up, make sure this works before moving on to the final little addition here. Yep, Oct 2011. So we got our date formatted nicely, exactly what we want. So the only thing we're missing is this needs to be in string interpolation. So put that into a string. This is kind of a backwards way of like doing this, but there we go. We want to type GitHub since space our date, right? So now let's run it. This should be the final piece of the puzzle to get this working. Let's pick another random follower here. Yep, GitHub since, we don't want the since capitalized, so I can change that real quick. GitHub since October 2016. So you can see our date label is all set up. We use the string extension, the date extension, to just create a nice 1 line of code to say convert to display format, and we're good. So let's make this S lowercase to finish it off. I'm not going to rerun it. We'll just trust that it's lowercase, but our date label is done. So now in the next videos, we're going to move on to getting these buttons working, and that's going to involve delegates and protocols. So big lesson coming up. Let's do it.